Welcome to the Elixir podcast, where we ask people from all walks of life and from around the world what their favourite poem is and why it's important to them, why or how it speaks to their heart. You can find links to the poems on the podcast listing and on my website, helenring.com. Today, we're talking to Rozâ, who is living in Brighton at the moment, and she has decided to share with us two of her own poems, which is really lovely. Hello, Rozâ.
Hi, Helen.
How are you today?
I'm well. It's been a really lovely day. The sun's been shining through the clouds a little bit in Brighton, which always makes me smile. And I've been really, really excited about this podcast. So I've not slept all night, which has been lovely.
No.
It's in a good way, exciting.
I hope you're not too nervous. It is a huge privilege always to listen to people talking about their poems. So what are you going to read us today, Rozâ?
I'm going to be reading two poems that I've written. One of them is called My Grandfather's Socks, and the other one is called Mother. I see them as like sister poems, if that makes sense. There's a big family theme here already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're excited to hear that. Which one would you like to read us first?
I'm going to read My Grandfather's Socks, and only purely because I wrote it first out of these two. So,
okay, when you're ready then.
Although my grandfather died 2 years before I was born, I feel as if I know him by the things he forgot. I am the things he left behind in this world before he went to wherever it is he went. I know him by my name, my Latvian, mysteriously spelled and wrongly pronounced name. Thank you for all the conversation starters with the Smiths and the Smythes of the world. I love to see their names squirm when they read mine. I know him by my bushy eyebrows that furrow in that way only a brooding Eastern Europeans would, telling the world around me my deepest and darkest secrets. I know him from my teeth that sit in my mouth like an assembly of unruly children. I have your wife's sweet mouth, but I also have your tremendous teeth. You must have been very wise to have such teeth as those rearranging my jaw to fit in. I know him by the feel of my tongue, sitting wrongly in my mouth. Every time I slip up on a word, I know it's because my big Latvian tongue won't fit in my tiny English mouth and is too slow for my huge Italian voice. I know him by the tear in the corner of my nonna's eye each and every time she talks about you. And I know that from it you must have been as handsome as you were hers. I know you because she'll never love another. I know him through my mother's stories. I can even feel her cheek still stinging 40 years after you slapped her round the face with your huge, soapy, washing up gloved hands. I know him by the features in my brother's face that tell the world that he's not from around here, though he was born in Homerton Hospital like the rest of you. But most of all, I know you by my feet. Though you left me your name, face, and memories, the thing that brings me closest to you are my feet. My cold, cold feet, which cannot warm up without your old grey socks that your daughter gave me years ago when she realised I had your malady. And so I sit here on the edge of my bed in another part of the world, a 24-year-old English-speaking woman, unburdened by the hardships of war and refuge. And I am my grandfather, her baba, his nonno, her eternal fancy man, because I will always have your feet and I will always know you.
Oh my goodness, Rozâ. That was really amazing. It was really amazing. So your grandfather was Latvian, is that right?
Yeah, he was Latvian and his mother was Estonian, but they lived in Latvia. Would you like me to tell you a little bit about him?
Yes, please. We'd love to hear about him.
I don't know everything there is, and I wish I really did because he sounds like a fascinating person. But what I do know is that he left home when he was 17. I think it was on his 17th birthday, from what I remember. to go and fight in World War II, as so many as our grandparents did. He actually never saw his mother again after that point. And in fact, he didn't hear from his family or even know if they had survived the war until his wedding day of all days, when he went back to his old flat to pick up any post before he moved in with my grandmother. And there was this letter where they'd finally tracked him down from America, and found out that they had all survived and that they were all safe, which I think is so powerful. And of all the days to find out,
Yeah.
I think that's such an incredible story. I know that at one point when he first met my dad, he didn't approve very much, so he decided to drink him under the table with very strong Latvian, some vodka type drink. And I can imagine that exact scene. I just think that's very funny.
That's also exactly the way my father approached all of our various lovers and prospective husbands in my family. He set himself the task of being able to drink more than them. So
Yeah, yeah.
and then he met your grandmother, who was not English either, was she?
No, no. So she wasn't a refugee like he was. So she had moved over because she decided she wanted to move to England, become phenomenally rich, and then bring all of her riches back to Italy. She was actually the first person in the whole region to move to another country, to leave. I only found that out this summer, actually. I knew that she was one of the first, but I didn't realize she was the first. And she went over, and, her sisters followed, and they all decided they would fall in love and find their Italian, husbands, except that the man she fell in love with wasn't Italian. And she was the only one of her sisters to do so. Which, for her, I don't think she talks enough about like how much of an impact that had, but both of them, I think, as two non-English speakers, found something in each other. And whether it was that he danced really well on that first night that they met, or whether it was, two strangers in a strange land, something obviously connected them instantly.
Rozâ, as you know, I actually know your nonna, and she once told us a story at one of your mother's lovely dinners that she has always felt guilty about this young man that she met when she first arrived in Coventry, who she only dated because he knew how to dance. And he taught her how to do ballroom dancing. And she had the express wish of being able to dance with the man who is going to become her husband, your grandfather. But she has this little bit of guilt about the fact that she felt she led this other boy on because she wanted to know how to waltz. So, so that's really, really amazing.
Yeah, I love when she tells me about that, because in fact there's a bit in the poem that references that story, because I once asked her why not that man? Why was it Nonno? And she literally thumped the table and said, "Oh, because he was not my fancy man." And Nonno obviously was. And I just loved that was how she saw him, as her fancy man, whatever that might have meant to her.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And that's sort of, often have this sort of strange, almost misappropriations of phrases when you're learning a new language, and you
Yeah.
inject your own meaning to them, So
Yeah.
that's really, really lovely. I found that poem so moving. As you could see, I could barely speak when you'd finished it. And it's so authentic, and you have clearly written it straight from your heart. And I think it's a wonderful document, actually, and elegy, if you like, to your grandfather. I think it's lovely. So you also have another poem, don't you? What's the second poem called?
It's just called Mother, which I guess is quite misleading because it's actually about my grandmother. So this is my paternal grandmother, whereas the other one was my maternal grandfather.
Okay.
And I didn't intend to write this as a sister poem, but they kind of, I don't know, they felt connected somehow.
Is your paternal grandmother, is she English?
She's English and Irish.
All right. Okay. Cool. Okay, lovely. Would you like to read us that one then?
Yes. Mother, like a god, do you see me all at once? From birth to the earth, from womb to my tomb? How many times have you seen me born? How many times will you see me die? How did you watch all the boundless possibilities of pain and suffering and let us go forth as suckling babes into it? Do you remember our first steps? Did you see our first fall? Do you look down on your creation? Do you judge our choices? Do you watch us fail and hope that we'll find the right way again? Do you see our faith and smile? Do you hurt when we cry? Do you hear our prayers and listen? Do you know our wishes and grant them? Do you know our wants and give all you possibly had to give? Did you see that we would change? Did you know that we would grow? Did you know in your breast that when evolution brought forth suckling, it brought forth nurturing too? On that first Mother's Day, at the dawn of mammals, the day that love was invented.
Wow. Oh, Rozâ, I mean that one's of another order altogether, isn't it? And it's 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 an amazing mixture of the visceral and the philosophical, almost religious in its approach to the spirit and to love. That's amazing. What made you write that poem?
So that was obviously about my grandmother, who died recently, and it was just before Mother's Day. And I'll be honest, I didn't know her in her later years as much. I only knew her as a child, and I felt like when I was thinking about her, it was always from a child's point of view. Which is why most of the poem is all in questions. You know, how a child is all questions, trying to find out about the world around them.
Yeah.
And I think it was a mixture of wanting to kind of write how I felt about her and reach out somehow. But also I was really inspired at the time by I think just evolution in general, and this concept that I think it's that kind of difference between being an ancestor and being a parent, and knowing how mammals, when they evolved, they kind of, they became mothers and fathers for the first time and started caring for their young, and seeing everything that they did. And it was the first time that parenting happened. And I just thought that was such an incredible concept that, that Mother's Day didn't exist until then, really.
Yeah.
So it just felt at the time those two concepts were in my head, and I wanted to try and put them into words.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely wonderful. And I wonder if you've read that book called The Psychology of Love, which is a book written by a series of scientists, biological scientists and psychologists, who start out in the book trying to account for the existence of love poetry. And they follow the evolution of mammals, and they discover that the earliest definition of the mammal was when they developed a part of the brain that could love. And it was the first time, as you say, when mammals had babies. So the first love was always the mother's love. So even in the earliest evolutionary mammal, I think it's called an echidna that we still have, they have this mothering instinct. And from it, they trace not only love, but they also trace grief. And they have analysed mammals and discovered that mammals grieve the loss of love in exactly the same way that we do. And fall into those phases of depression and anger and despair when they are neglected or abandoned and so on by their mother figure. So I should give you this book. I've got it because it's exactly that. That's exactly what your poem is saying, and it's absolutely true. And it sort of blows apart in a way our very sort of, I guess, 19th, 20th century view that love is all about romantic love, rather than actually love's predominant force is one of nurturing of offspring. And when you have children, you will experience this I think, as everyone I know has had this, being blown away by the feeling of unending and unconditional love for your child that is beyond anything that you can imagine, beyond anything that could happen in the world of romance,
Yeah.
And it's all hormonal. And it's all evolutionary,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love your sense of history, that of this idea that your selfhood is intimately connected with the people that have been in the past, even that you haven't necessarily even met, of your grandfathers and great grandparents' generation, and the knowledge that actually not only physically, but you probably also have some of the very gestures that that your long dead ancestors would have had, and it's such a striking idea, and also really, really comforting. Really comforting. I remember when my daughter was born, my father came to visit her when she was really tiny, and she was just playing with a little, twizzling her hair around her head as she was sleeping. And my father burst into tears because he just said, "You used to do that. You did that when you were a baby in the cradle, So even things like that, I mean, they may be general things that everybody does. Maybe every baby does that. But I like to think that it's actually something intimately connected with our sense of rootedness and identity. And for you, you have a really strong, I think one of the reasons you have a really strong sense of that is because you come from a family of moving people who've moved from one country to another, people who've either through the wish to improve their lives or the wish to escape some calamity, and therefore those things, those ideas of connectedness need nurturing. You need to take care of those, because people who move, the nomads of the world, it's so easy for them to lose their sense of connectedness and culture and identity. So I think it's wonderful that you are writing like this about your family. It's really good.
Thank you.
What else are you writing? Are you writing some other things now?
In all honesty, I've for the first time ever stopped new projects and started going back and looking at what I've written before. I mean, I wrote the one about my grandfather 7 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
7? Yeah, nearly 8 years ago. And I hadn't revisited it, and it reminded me to go back and look at what I had written and kind of see, just spend a little bit more time with who I was at 24 years old, or, whenever I'd written them. In fact, I think because, I've just moved down to Brighton in the last 6 months, I feel like now is the time I feel the most reflective, because it's like closing the chapter on my life in London, where I've lived, since I was born. But I don't know, I feel like also part of me hasn't quite got the same kind of drive at the moment to start something new. And I do want to spend a little bit of time kind of reflecting. I don't know, it feels more natural at the moment just to be going back and kind of giving a bit more attention to these. And, this is the first time that I've shared my poetry. And, I've never shown it to anyone except my family, well, my mum and my dad, and that's it.
Have you shown Nonna the one about your grandfather? Or do you think
No, I think she would like it. I think she would. I just haven't, I don't know, I haven't shown it to her yet. And I was thinking it might make a nice Christmas present to like read it out to her or something.
Oh, I think she'd love that. That would be an amazing thing to do. And it's quite natural to foster your bonds and your links with the past when you're starting a new phase of your journey in life, So I think it's quite natural doing what you're doing. I wanted to ask you something for the sake of our audience. I'd like to tell you that Rozâ is a music teacher and an amazing singer. And I'd just like to ask you how you think children can, if you like, access their own creativity through the work that you do, through music, because that's obviously such a huge part of your life. And you've always been a musician, right? Everything you've done is music.
Yeah.
I wonder, do you ever get them to write lyrics and so on to set to music, or
Oh
do
yeah.
yeah, they do their own creative work. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
It's so, I find it so difficult because um there's this kind of part of me that's, I want all children to just to be creating all the time, whatever they want. And
Mm.
then there's that sensible teacher brain that's like, well, we also have to do exams. And I can't stand that sensible voice because I feel like it's always been a bit of a kind of, the manager and the staff are arguing in my head.
Yeah,
Um, Whereas I've tried in the past few years to kind of marry those two thoughts and thought, okay, well, we have to do these exams, but why can't the children enjoy it and get some creativity out of it? And so I wrote for my year 10s and year 12. So basically, when you start your GCSE or A levels, a course that you go through to help you create your own composition, which they have to do anyway.
mm.
And it has step-by-step guides on, could you use these skills? Could you do this? But ultimately, it's quite open, and the students get to have, a little bit more of their own say on what has inspired them. And it could be that I give them a stimulus. So, for example, I took some of my year 10s last year on a trip to the Greenwich Observatory. And I
Mm.
said, I would like you to write a piece of music on your interpretation of where you are in space and time. And it
Mm.
can be your identity, it can be something to do with time as a concept, could do with the planets, like cycles, the moon, whatever you want, just whatever you take from this.
Mm.
uh, I'd like you to do that. And that was just before the summer. And then when they came back after the summer, I was gearing myself up for, I'm going to have to chase these pieces of homework from these unruly teenagers. And they'd all done completely different pieces of music and I almost finished them over the summer, which is unheard of in especially coursework
Yeah,
words.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I wonder if that's because, it felt almost separate to the course. It felt like here's something that you can be creative with, go
Yeah.
and just see what happens. And actually those pieces of music, when we did analyze them and have to examine them, they did really well. And I wonder if it's because the children spent more time on them because it was their own rather than they
Exactly,
had.
because they could own it, and they could own it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a real, need, obviously, in the school system to create curriculums and stick to them. But I'm a firm believer in the fact that we shouldn't really introduce proper curriculum until the last minute. That the teachers that I know that refuse that, often they have the freedom of working in international schools. They have the children developing very much along their own lines and with guidance, obviously, but they are able to take ownership of their work and their development without worrying about the syllabus. And then, of course, they become very adept at things, especially when they're doing things like language learning, which is what I've traditionally taught, because they have really, really taken ownership of their learning. And then when you start introducing the things they need to know for an exam, that becomes incredibly easy because they're already like you say, really, really engaged because they look at it as a personal project of their own to become musicians or to become linguists and so on. It's really nice. I think sometimes the pressures on our education system are really damaging, not just for the children but also for the teachers who also need to be able to feel as if they can put some of their own personal touch into something that they're passionate about. And most teachers I know are really passionate about their subject. They just like a little bit more room to move, room to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think there is somewhere a balance that you can strike between what you have to do and what you want to do in the classroom, as a teacher. And because,
Yeah.
none of us are just teachers,
Yeah.
we're all secretly novelists and,
Yeah,
so
yeah. No, that's absolutely the case, I think. And also none of us are just purely academic. And I think the more that we can hopefully start expanding again our attitude to education, the more children will study music or creative writing or drama or art, and they will be able to bring the really fresh new neurological pathways they're developing to the other subjects that they're doing.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I remember when we were doing the project on space and time, and I kept thinking, thank goodness that this corresponds with their science lessons on on space because, you know, it was almost like project-based learning just by pure accident, because it meant that they were obviously being informed by what they're learning elsewhere, and it all kind of fit into one, and they could see how, you know, things that you learn aren't just, you know, subjects. Everything's interconnected.
And connected with a sense of self, you know, rather like you're doing in your poetry, is you know, building that self-awareness of your connectedness with your environment and with your family and with your histories and so on. I think that's really, really lovely. There was this wonderful piece of research done donkeys years ago where people were trying to, I can't remember the organization they were trying to do it, they were trying to improve literacy and numeracy rates in a school. And they offered extra maths to one group of children and extra English to another group of children. And then to another group, they simply gave music, extra music. And at the end of the year, the children who'd had the maths tuition had improved in their maths. And the children who'd had English tuition had improved in their English. But the children who'd been doing music had improved in maths and English. Way ahead of the people who'd had the targeted tuition. Yeah, so, you know, we are very we're mad if we think that our imaginations are useless. You know.
Yeah.
You know, talking evolutionarily, you know, there are these two lines of evolution for the human species, and one of them is the development of rational argument. This is the mind in the cave idea, and one of them is imagination. You know, is our seeking for almost out-of-body experiences where we imagine things that are beyond ourselves. And without the two fusing together, we could never have had the development of humanity, you know. So we do ourselves a disservice if we don't prioritize poetry and and music and art and so on. So
yeah, absolutely. You can see the impact it has on children, and, you know, like you said, it can be everything from, you know, music or, you know, the arts as well don't just benefit exams, but also well-being, or even just attendance to school. It's, you know, it can be something as simple as that, as do they come in, are they excited to learn, are they engaged in the classroom? You know, there would be some students where I know that their attendance will be best just before a concert because of all the rehearsals, because that's the one thing that will bring them into school that day. And maybe that's not what the school wants it to be as the main motivator, but it is. And so, you know, why not use that for these kids? Is, you know, give them that one thing that they desperately want, and you know, where they get a sense of achievement from. You know, why not?
So Rozâ, going back to your poems, I'd really like you to read them again to us, but I wonder if that you could also tell us why you think it's important to write or important to create. You know, just for yourself. You don't have to talk about your students. I mean, they can find their own reasons.
I think for me, and this is very personal to me, I think the reason why it's important to write is it just feels like everything that's going on inside my head suddenly is outside my head. And as, you know, someone who's lived in here for so long, and I feel like I've missed what's out here, it's been a really good way to connect with the world that's around me. And, you know, and all of those kind of secrets and thoughts and desires and worries, everything suddenly, even if it's out on paper or written on a note on my phone or recorded on a message, all of those things it's kind of like almost like me bleeding myself into the world and just letting go, but also connecting. I don't know if
I love that. No, say yes, it's fine. You can inhabit a paradox. Absolutely. No, that's a really beautiful thought. Yeah, and I think that's what it is for lots of people. We had another young poet on last season who found that he connected with himself through writing in a way that he couldn't just by doing his life, that it was adding something that was really important to him. He couldn't necessarily say what, but it was very much, yes, I feel more settled in myself, more rooted, more okay with myself as a result of writing. So yeah, and I think it's a really important thing. Okay, my darling, would you like to read these other two poems for us again? That would be really nice.
Yes, I'm going to go back to my grandfather's socks first.
Okay.
Although my grandfather died 2 years before I was born, I feel as if I know him by the things he forgot. I am the things he left behind in this world before he went to, well, wherever it is he went. I know him by my name, my Latvian, mysteriously spelled and wrongly pronounced name. Thank you for all the conversation starters with all the Smiths and Smythes of the world. I love to see their names squirm when they read mine. I know him by my bushy eyebrows, that furrow in that way that only a brooding Eastern Europeans would, telling the world around me my deepest and darkest secrets. I know him from my teeth that sit in my mouth like an assembly of unruly children. I have your wife's sweet mouth, but I also have your tremendous teeth. You must have been very wise to have such teeth as those rearranging my jaw to fit in. I know him by the feel of my tongue sitting wrongly in my mouth. Every time I slip up on a word, I know it's because my big Latvian tongue won't fit in my tiny English mouth and is too slow for my huge Italian voice. I know him by the tear in the corner of my nonna's eye each and every time she talks about you, and I know from it that you must have been as handsome as you were hers. I know you because she'll never love another. I know him through my mother's stories. I can even feel her cheek still stinging 40 years after you slapped her around the face with your huge, soapy, washing up gloved hands. I know him by the features in my brother's face that tell the world that he's not from around here, though he was born in Homerton Hospital like the rest of you. But most of all, I know you by my feet. Though you left me your name, face, and memories, the thing that brings me closest to you are my feet. My cold, cold feet, which cannot warm up without your old grey socks that your daughter gave me years ago when she realised I had your malady. And so I sit here on the edge of my bed in another part of the world, a 24-year-old English-speaking woman, unburdened by the hardships of war and refuge. And I am my grandfather, her baba, his nonno, her eternal fancy man, because I will always have your feet, and I will always know you.
It's just gorgeous. That's just gorgeous. Now, you're going to send us some photos, aren't you, of your grandfather and your grandmother? So
Yes.
I'd like the listeners to know that when you go to the website, you'll not only be able to see Rozâ's beautiful poems, but you'll also be able to see photographs of the people she's been writing about.
Absolutely.
Rozâ, please could you read us Mother again? That would be lovely.
Mother, like a god, do you see me all at once? From birth to the earth, from womb to my tomb? How many times have you seen me born? How many times will you see me die? How did you watch all the boundless possibilities of pain and suffering and let us go forth as suckling babes into it? Do you remember our first steps? Did you see our first fall? Do you look down on your creation? Do you judge our choices? Do you watch us fail and hope that we'll find the right way again? Do you see our faith and smile? Do you hurt when we cry? Do you hear our prayers and listen? Do you know our wishes and grant them? Do you know our wants and give all you possibly had to give? Did you see that we would change? Did you know that we would grow? Did you know in your breast that when evolution brought forth suckling, it brought forth nurturing too? On that first Mother's Day, at the dawn of mammals, the day that love was invented.
Rozâ, it has been such a privilege to hear your poetry, and thank you so much for sharing it with us all. I'm hoping this will inspire lots of other people to write their own poems. If you're a regular listener and are enjoying the podcast, it would mean the world to me if you could hit the follow button on your podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review and a 5-star rating. Remember, you can find the poems that feature in each episode on my website, helenwing.com. If you'd like to support the production costs of our Elixir Poetry podcast, please feel free to buy me a coffee. Thanks for listening.